Volume 10, Humor. The Lady of Lyons, New York, by H.C. Witwer. She'll never look more beautiful than she did that wild night, when she stood beside me in Fairfax's deadfall, and told me to make good. I'll never be as brainless again as I was that same evening when I let her go with a paltry handshake. A fool and his money is soon parted. Imagine a chilly goodbye to the best looker since Venus the Milo, when I might have cinched matters then and there. I could have kissed her, and she wouldn't have shrieked, but it took me many a day to find that part of it out. Well, when she told me to leave Fairfax Falls flat on its collarbone and put myself over, she started something. Who was she? Wait, I'm going to be haul off and broadcast the lowdown on the whole business. This may not be as pungent as Romeo and Juliet, but at least it's shorter. Speaking of truffles, the first thing everybody usually asks me is how did I ever manage to climb out of the ash can and get to the top of the heap? I read the other day where a great man was asked that same question. To what do you attribute your success? Was the way it was put to him. They thought he was going to say it was the influence of his mother, the love of the little woman he was to wed, his early religious training, working 24 hours a day, or something like that. Well, he crossed them. To what do I attribute my success? He says. Why, to my ability, of course. There's a guy after my own heart. He had the courage not to be modest. Although I've yet to experience the sensations of being called anything else but Bill, not counting oaths, my rightful name is William R. Grimm, Esquire. I graduated with high honors from the University of Experience and am titled to place TD after my name, if the mood should hit me. TD is a 10-letter vertical word meaning taxi driver. And don't curl your lip. We can't all start life in Buckingham Palace. I guess you figure me hard-boiled. Well, if you had been in hot water as much as I have, you'd be hard-boiled too. That initial R in my name stands for the word Reginald, and was a big concession on the part of my Maine Mountain father to my sainted and romantical mother, who, I understand, fondly wished to baptize me Percy. Dad was a roaring-voiced building contractor of the Two-Fisted School, a handsome giant from his pictures. Mother was his exact opposite, frail, dainty, refined. Their entirely different compositions had staggered many a clash in me. From my father I got my brawn, from my mother I got my ambition. Both parents were lost at sea when I was a kid, and the pennies which should have come to me quickly dissipated by an equally dissipated uncle. It's certainly a crime that the only revelations we can pick out for ourselves is our wives, ain't it? Well, being thrown on my own at an age when I should have been a pupil in someone's high school, my intentions has not always been better than my grammar. If they wasn't, I could be hung. I guess I've about covered the situation with regards to myself. Except I might add that never pick a fight and I never duck one. My motto is, if hit on one cheek, turn the other, and if hit on the other, knock 'em cold. Otherwise, I'm polite to one and all, know my groceries, can wear a dress suit without somebody asking me to show them their table, read a lot to give myself a synthetic education, and watch my speech like Puss watches a mouse. It ain't half as hard to come up from the gutter as it is to keep from bringing the gutter up with you. That last one's a real feat. At the winsome age of 20, which is where I'm going to begin giving you this load of my adventures, I was foiling the poorhouse by operating the only taxi in Fairfax Falls, New York. Husky, healthy, and not exactly resembling a gorilla, I didn't have a worry or a dime in the world. As I was young enough to have dreams in the daytime, I firmly intended to check out the taxi racket and win fame and fortune at something. But I hadn't located my trick just yet. Nevertheless, I'd made up my mind that someday a glass-paneled door was going to have on it, in gold letters, W. Reginald Grimm, and beneath, President. Whether that would be followed by of the United States or of the United Garbage Company, I didn't know or care. I wasn't very fluent with money while I was bounding around at the wheel of a taxi, but I was certainly seeing a lot of life. What I missed in Jack, I made up for in laughs. I also learned a lot of things which didn't do me no harm in later years. Few people has as good a chance to view human nature as a taxi driver has. Experience is a hard school, no Yale or Harvard, but for the pupils which will pay attention to the teacher, it's a great one. My mock taxi, built by myself professionally from junked parts of a flock of different cars, was something to think about. It cost me less than $150, and at that price it was a steal. There was room enough for a Congress to meet in that thing, and it had 3 speeds, hither, thither, and yon. It would go anywheres, by freight. Around Fairfax Falls, they called it the Leaping Tuna, but my name for it was the Gambler 6, as it was nearly always broke. There was a garage in this slab run by Skip Mellon, who ground a mean valve, but I done all my own repair work after one interview with that baby. I asked him what I could do to stop my motor from smoking, and he says to keep my tobacco where the motor can't get at it. Skip writes vaudeville acts for a living now. Left Hook O'Brien and Butch Ford was my 2 best pals in Fairfax Falls. In spite of the fact that we've only known each other for a dozen years now, by a strange coincidence, they're still my friends. O'Brien was a classy lightweight boxer fighter, and Butch was his trainer and second. No drawing room vows, but 2 of the squarest shooters which ever put on a collar. Left Hook O'Brien was born Izzy Rambowitz, but took that Irish name for business purposes. He was nobody's fool. Once when I kidded him about being a Jewish Sinn Feiner, he grinned and answered me this: I like to have the crowd with me when I go in there. Well, you listen to him. The next time you see a box fight, you'll hear, kill the wop. knock the Jew stiff, smack the Swede silly, flatten the big lime knee. But did you ever hear a crowd fight, yell, kill the Irishman? A payoff? What? O'Brien's one and only ambition was to cop the lightweight title, and Butch Ford's was the wake-up every morning of his life with $5 in his kick. The first big turning point in my life arrived when Butch got me to drive him and left O'Brien to Rochester, where O'Brien was the box knockout Burns, before going on to New York City for some more important quarrels. I'd seen O'Brien go a half-dozen times before I knew he was good, and so did the lightweight champion, which didn't wish no part of my boyfriend. On paper, O'Brien figured to stop Knockout Barnes in a couple of frames, and it looked like a great chance for me to win a few nickels for myself. Likewise, I'd see the brawl from a ringside seat, which Butch staked me to. As if that wasn't enough, business comes along and combines itself with the pleasure I looked forward to having. Just before I pulled out of town, I got a call to stop at Lyons the day after the fight, pick up a school teacher named Miss Baxter, and haul her back to Fairfax Falls, where she was carted to do her stuff at our new schoolhouse. Like everyone else, Left Hook O'Brien rated Knockout Burns a pushover, and he trained for the battle by getting his nails manicured. At that time, he gave Burns a fearful pasting, made a chopping block of him, but he couldn't put him away. As game as a punching bag, and as tough as a life sentence, Burns was in there to stay the limit. That's what he managed to do, though every round O'Brien done everything to this Gill but run away with his wife. Burns, being a local idol, the fair-minded referee called it a draw. If that scrimmage was a draw, so was the war. However, I bet that my buddy would slap Burns for a loop, and that rotten decision cost me my lifetime savings, 34 Iron Men. I had to borrow money for gas to get home on. Not so good. Came the dawn, as they say on the screen, and right after a 2-bit breakfast, I shoved off for Lyons to get this school teacher I was due to bring back to Fairfax Falls. On the way out of Rochester, a female voice suddenly calls my name when I'm stopped by a traffic signal, and I immediately pull over to the curb as the voice happens to belong to Pansy Pilkington. Don't laugh. Pansies made many a wiser boy than me stop, look, and listen. It was less than a year later that this palatable young lady was to stand New York on its head in front row of the Foleys. I know you never heard of no Pansy Pilkington in the Foleys, neither did nobody else. However, I ain't going to tip you the name she used there, as it's a hobby of mine to be a gentleman, and Pansy was supposed to have hit Broadway direct from Vassar. But at this time, she was just lowly biscuit shooter at the commercial house in Fairfax Falls, and probably thought Flo Zankfeld was a ball player. The super flapper of the Berg, and as soothing to the eye as green goggles. Pansy had that schoolgirl complexion without the bother of going to school. She was a disturbance of the first water, there is no question about it. Still, she never made me feverish. I guess I was pansy-proof. For one thing, I figured it would take too much Jack to step out with this Jill. Her arms were full of bundles, and she dumped some of the front seat of my taxi beside me with a sigh of relief. "Hello, pansies," I says. "You look keen. How come you're in Rochester?" "Well, Bill, I got sick of being a mail-order Mary," she smiles. "You know, send us only $2 and get this beautiful Paris creation, and simply sign the coupon and postman will toss this almost fur in your door. I've left that stuff to the dumb Doras. I've always been on a shopping carouse." "You wouldn't fool me, would you?" I grins back. "What did you use for money?" "I love that," says Pansy indignantly. "Suppose I told you I drew a month's salary in advance." "Be your age, Pansy," I says. "If you told me that, I'd get hysterical. That guy you work for ain't putting nothing out. He's too stingy to harbor a suspicion. Why, oh, that reminds me," butts in Pansy, opening her handbag excitedly. "Today is the boss's birthday. Say, listen, Bill, run over to that gent's furnishing store and pick out a nice tie for him, one you'd wear yourself. Here, that is all I have left." With that, she hands me $1. "I can get him a collar for this, but no tie," I says. "But I have no more money," says Pansy, trying some eye work on me. "Maybe you, There ain't a chance of me putting the B on me either," I told her. "I'm as flat as a ballroom floor." And I explained to her that Left Hook O'Brien, knockout Burns, shambles done to me. Pansy looks vexed. "Well, run over anyway, and see what you can get for a man for 50 cents, and I'll watch your taxi." I prowled into the swell haberdashery, and they immediately suspected I wasn't no means Vincent Astor, so they treated me accordingly. "I want to get a tasty tie, and I have $50 to squander," I tell a haughty clerk. "What would you suggest?" The clerk gives me an up and down and yawns in my face. "I'd suggest another shop," he says, and walks away. A few doors above this drum, there was a 5 and 10-cent store. I blowed in there and bought Pansy's boss 5 ties. "I wish I could think of a little speech to make when I give him these," says Pansy. "Just say, 'Here's some ties for your birthday. Try and wear 'em,' I says. 'Come on, hop in and I'll take you back home with me.'" I began to think of the long voyage to Fairfax Falls with nothing for company but that schoolteacher. I had to get to Lyons. Probably a comic Valentine. "I'd love to go back with you, Bill," says Pansy. "But, well, I have my return ticket, and—" "Here's a chance to play a mean trick on the railroad by not using it," I interrupts. "I got to pick up another lady in Lyons. She's going to teach at our new school, so you needn't be afraid to go with me." "Afraid of you?" says Pansy, giving me a killing look. "Why, I'd never be afraid of you, Bill. I think you're dear." "I wouldn't be surprised," I says. "My father was an elk." As a matter of fact, it was me which was afraid of Pansy. "As for this schoolteacher," continues Pansy, climbing into the seat beside me and dumping her bundles in the back of the cab, "let her walk to Fairfax Falls, or buy herself a pair of roller skates or something." But though a long ride with just Pansy looked plenty appetizing, I needed the sugar there was in it for me if I took his schoolteacher back. So I rolled into Lyons, pulled up at the address I'd been given, and got the shock of my young life. Somehow I had gotten the idea that Miss Baxter would have be a hatchet-faced old maid as thin as a dime and just as thrilling. I looked for a horn-rimmed glasses, hair plastered back flat, with a voice and a costume about like a man's. That's the way Miss Tice, our other school teacher, checked up. A girl would be safe anywheres, and I don't mean maybe. Instead of that, Miss Baxter was simply a panic. Around my own age, garbed in West Fairfax Falls, would be wearing about 5 years later the latest bob, the most recent everything else. A unbeatable argument for short skirts. Well, a breath taker. She just outclassed Pansy, which was anything but an eyesore herself. Pansy looked 3 or 4 times as surprised as I was, and she presented the Lady of Lyons with a peeved stare. Pansy could have been in Finland as far as Miss Baxter was concerned. I've been waiting for you for an hour, this remarkable and highly annoyed schoolteacher says to me. Listen, I says, somewhat dazed. Don't get mad over that hour's wait. I've been waiting 20 years for you. Pansy's scornful snort didn't stop us looking at each other for maybe half a minute, during which Miss Baxter executed a blush which ruined me. Then, with a quick frown, she discouraged any further efforts on my part, but as I hopped out and swung open the door of the cab for her, her eyes was smiling if her lips wasn't. With a murderous glance at me, Pansy got off of the front seat and stepped in the back too. She was what you might call fuming. I introduced her to Miss Baxter and explained how I happened to go out on a night carrying a girl with me. Inwardly, I was wishing Pansy was in Portugal, not like I disliked her, but... However, Miss Baxter seemed satisfied with my explanation and made room for Pansy beside her. Then began a ride to Fairfax Falls, which to me was a riot, no kidding. Here I am with 2 beautiful girls and a 25-mile drive staring me in the face, and the fact that they're both there makes it out of the question for me to click with one or the other. It was a typical case of how happy I could be with either was the other dear charmer away. In the back of the cab, the girls is breaking their necks to be polite with each other, but the conversation died a natural death after a few minutes, and they didn't even make an attempt to fake it. However, I was gulled by Miss Baxter, Barbara Baxter, as I managed to eavesdrop, and I think a noble try at promoting myself. I managed to exchange some careless words with her, which soon steamed Pansy and caused that young lady to hi-hat me. This seemed to give Barbara much secret amusement, and I guess that's the only reason she talked to me at all. She must have thought I was a fearful patsy then. I got so interested in Barbara that I made a wrong turn on a detour and lost the state road. So I stopped outside a garage. What's the best way for us to get to Fairfax Falls from here? I asked the near mechanic, which came out in answer to the horn. This clown walks all around my homemade taxi, looking at it like it was the first one he had ever seen in his born days. You wish to get to Fairfax Falls in that boiler? He inquires, like he can't believe my ears. Absolutely, I says. How will I get there? Well, if it was me, I'd pray for a miracle, he answers, curling his lip. With that, he walks into the garage, and both of them girls laugh their heads off. But I found the road, and no further noteworthy events happened till we were within a few miles of Fairfax Falls. Then it was different. The old boat was rattling off a noble 25 miles an hour when the sudden hair-raising wail of a siren makes the girls jump. Through the rear view mirror I peg a big, costly speed wagon, cut along racing lines, roaring over the road behind me. I recognized the car, and I likewise knew that the proprietor of same had no right to use that siren, as he was neither a police car, a fire engine, or an ambulance. I started to tell the nervous girls that, when this bozo doing 50 miles an hour, if he were moving at all, crowds me on a turn, and we go crashing to a ditch with Pansy yelling murder. I still remember there wasn't a single squawk come from Barbara Baxter. She was a thoroughbred, that's positive. However, we landed right side up, and there was nobody hurt but the mud guards and the temper. While I'm taking stock of the grief, our opponent drives slowly back around the turn, stops beside us, and gets out of his car. He was no stranger to me, being no less than Jack Fairfax, the shriek of Fairfax Falls, and the first villain I ever met with a name like a hero. Roughly about the same age, me and Fairfax has been first-class enemies of years standing, our private wars starting long before I knocked this tomato stiff for deliberately running his car over my dog. That's the tip-off on the kind of guy he was. One of these babies with a chin you'd love to touch. Jack Fairfax was something of a mystery in our town, where, in spite of the fact that it was named after his family, he was as popular as typhoid fever. His people had lived in Europe for years, and Fairfax himself aced around mostly in Rochester and New York City, though nearly all Fairfax Falls was owned by his parents. He simply drove in every now and then to burn the natives up in Ritzingham, while showing some of his rich, sarcastical, cake-eating friends the village named after him. Amongst the Fairfax properties was a crumbling old mansion on the outskirts of town, which some time before had been spread all over the Sunday magazine sections of the newspaper as a haunted house. It was still looked on that way by most of Fairfax Falls, and the citizens gave it a wide berth in passing. You couldn't get a kid within a mile of it. Strange noises, clanking chains, unearthly lights, and weird groans was just a few of the spirit signs which half the town swore to, and the other half laughed off. Personally, I was what you might call neutral, but though the fact that Jack Fairfax constantly visited the place and bragged about doing it, I figured the haunted house was really just applesauce. Well, when Fairfax came back that day after running me into the ditch, I was naturally fit to be tied, but on account of Barbara Baxter being there, I didn't smack him down. Regarding the subject of the girls going wild over cavemen, well, some do and some don't, I was taking no reckless chances. Dressed like a fashion plate with a cigarette sticking out of his mouth from a long gold holder, this proper Humpty Dumpty stood there sneering at me, and of course alongside him I looked like a tramp. I'm going to complain to the authorities about that remarkable conveyance of yours, Grim, he says with a nasty grin. It's a menace to navigation. Pansy laughed, but Barbara didn't. I seen her coldly sizing him up. You should be hardly ashamed of yourself, burst out Barbara warmly. We might have been killed. It was then Fairfax lammed her for the first time. One amazed look at her floored him. You could see that he was that in his very readable face. Off comes his swagger cap. It hadn't come off for Pansy. Don't think because you're still on your feet that I'll forget this, Fairfax, I says. If we was alone, I'd lay you like a linoleum, you big false alarm. He pays me not the faintest attention. He's all eyes for Barbara Baxter. You gave the horn and I tried to avoid crowding you, but I was going too fast, he stammers, talking directly to her. I'm terribly sorry. Won't you let me take you the rest of the way into town? At that, I dropped the jack I was getting ready to raise to the front wheels with and stared from him to Barbara. I noticed Pansy staring at me, and her face was good and angry. Fairfax had everything I didn't have: clothes, class, money, a swell car, a great line of chatter. Regardless of the miles that there was between them, in every way, Fairfax and Barbara belonged to the same drawing rooms. That was a cinch. I was just a taxi driver. Where did I rate in favors from her? Barbara hesitated and looked thoughtfully at me while Fairfax's hungry eyes never left her face. He was hanging on her answer like it was a matter of life and death. I felt pretty low. To me, it was a matter of life or death to my hopes. How long will it take you to make repairs? Barbara asked me. 5 minutes, I says, before the words was hardly out of her mouth. You're crazy, snorts Fairfax as he pulls open the door of my taxi. If you'll step out, miss, I shall wait for you. You needn't bother, interrupts Barbara, with icicles on every word, and my heart tries to climb out through my ribs. Get away from that cab and make it snappy, I bawls at Fairfax, taking a step toward him. He moved slowly away, and I could swear there was a touch of contempt in Barbara's glance at him. He's seen it too, but the ignored and enraged Pansy gave him an out, enabled him to take the air without choosing me. You can ride me into town, Mr. Fairfax, said Pansy, and hopping out of my taxi, she flounces into the front seat of Fairfax's bus. Fairfax had invited her, and this Boy Scout wasn't particularly overjoyed at the idea of rolling into Fairfax Falls with the commercial house waitress by his side, beautiful or not. He had no choice, and he shot away from a grinding gears and was probably a grinding of teeth, too. The last I got was a poisonous glare from Pansy. I'm sorry I ain't got some magazines or something in the car to amuse you, I said calmly to Barbara when they had gone in a cloud of dust. Because it's going to take me a good hour and lots of equally good luck to get this mechanical toy where it will roll. A flash of alarm in her lovely face is quickly chased by anger. What do you mean? She demands. Why did you tell me you could repair it in 5 minutes? I wouldn't fool you. It was because I wanted you to stay, I says truthfully, opening up the hood and gazing at the motor. You're having a romantical adventure. Don't scream. Wham! What a furious stare I got for a minute. Then I grinned cheerfully at her, and darned if she didn't grin back. Why didn't you want to go in town with Fairfax, that other fellow? I asked her while I was putting around. She opens a little beauty bag she's carrying and powders the end of the most bewitching nose since Helen from Troy. I don't like his type, she says. You seem to know him well. Who is he? Well, that was just the beginning of 486 questions asked me by this toothsome young lady while I was trying to get Mr. Motor to moat. She wanted to know all about Fairfax Falls, the natives, the Fairfax family history, etc., and even etc. The haunted house particularly aroused her attention, and she made me promise to show her the place at my earliest convenience. Then she dreamily begins brushing the sleeve of her dress with a lily-white hand. And Pansy? She asked me without looking up. Your sweetheart? By no means, I grin. I ain't got no sweethearts. I'm just a boy which girls forget. That extracted a laugh from Barbara, a delightful sound as she handled it. You're a most unusual taxi driver, she says. Tell me something about yourself. Well, at last we'd struck a subject on which I was well posted, and I certainly done it justice. During the course of the next half hour, I broadcasted. Barbara Baxter didn't pitch right into her job as a schoolteacher, but Jack Fairfax stayed in town and pitched right into trying to put over a fast one. He fairly swamped Barbara with flowers, candy, books, auto ride invitations, and what have you. Then, to my great astonishment and rage, the scissor bill began to get results. Twice she went out riding with him, which got me red-handed and tickled Pansy silly. After giving matters plenty of due consideration, I decided to interview Barbara on the subject of Jack Fairfax. I seen her trip into Vackley's drugstore one morning and stopped my comedy taxi outside. I strolled in after her. We sat down at the fountain, and I piled her with a chocolate soda. Where have you been keeping yourself? She asks me, watching my face in the mirror behind the counter. Long time no see. That don't seem to have ruined your health, I says gloomily. If I was you, I wouldn't give this Fairfax too much leeway. Fun's fun, but that bird's forever looking for the best of it, and just a moment, she cuts me off, colder by 54 degrees than the ice cream in her glass. I think you forget that you and I, but chance acquaintances, Bill. You're not my father, my brother, my guardian, or my fiancé. I'm quite able to take care of myself in any company. Surprised and hurt, I leaped off my stool. Goodbye and excuse me, I says. Darn it, I could feel my face flaming as red as all the tomatoes in the world. She had given me the raspberry cold turkey. I started for the door, positive that there ain't no Santa Claus, but she called back in a far different tone of voice. Is your taxi engaged? She smiled, and I'm in love all over again. No, I says, and I ain't engaged either. I ain't even going with nobody. Then take me out and show me that haunted house you told me about, she commands, and take that sullen look off your face. You know, you're really handsome when you smile, Bill. When you smile, the rest of 'em is just girls, I says, and told the truth. Well, I drive her out to Fairfax's alleged haunted house, and once we get there, I had a hard time getting her to leave. Although she'd asked me a raft of questions about this trap before, that didn't stop her from asking me all about it again. I never seen nobody so curious. Did anybody else besides Fairfax ever visit the haunted house? When and how often is the ghostly noises heard? Had the place ever been offered for sale? Did Fairfax himself tell people it was haunted? That's just a few of the things Barbara wanted to know, and I gave her as many details as I had in stock. Fairfax heard about this trip we took, probably from Pansy Pilkington, which saw us coming back, and he gnashed his teeth. The very next day he walks up to my stand outside the hotel and says his car's in the repair shop and he wants to engage my taxi for the afternoon. He acted so friendly, I should have been suspicious. But instead, I was thrown off my guard. So I met him at 2 o'clock as arranged, and he orders me to drive him to the commercial house. Still, I don't tumble. But when he comes outside with Barbara Baxter on his arm, I like to fell off my seat. Just drive us around for a couple hours, says Fairfax, grinning from ear to ear. I'll tell you when to come back. Barbara looked amazed when she'd seen me, staring first at Fairfax, then back at me. I thought she was in on this attempt to humiliate me, and I give her a frigid glare. Up goes her head with a toss. You don't mind driving us? She asks me. Why should I? I shot at her. This is my business, ain't it? Scandalous. But within an hour, I was 3 feet past infuriation at the cracks of Fairfax was making about me from the back of the cab. I suddenly whirled my taxi off the road, shot through a gap in a fence, and drove madly across a newly plowed field, stepping on the gas and nearly bumping my passengers and my seagoing taxi apart. When later I came to a halt outside the commercial house, I'm satisfied I'd have dropped dead if a look from Fairfax could have killed me. How much do I owe you, you infernal idiot? He pants, crazy mad. $25, you inveterate sap, I says, and taking off my coat, I begin to roll up my sleeves. Barbara tried hard to keep a straight face and glare at me, but she must have thought of something funny because all at once she burst out laughing, winked at me behind Fairfax's back, and skipped into the hotel. Fairfax gazed after her, glowered at me for a minute, muttered a baffled oath, and practically hurled the 25 fish at me. In a way, that was a disappointment. I was hoping he'd want to battle. If he had, he'd have sure got service. About a week after Barbara Baxter descended on Fairfax Falls, a couple of more strangers got off 84, the dilapidated spur-line train, and stepped into my cab. Right off the bat, I got a kick when they asked to be hauled to the haunted house. They're a part of my mysterious-looking eggs, and one of them must have spoke out of turn somewheres, because he had a broken nose. While I'm trying to figure him out, the other guy says they're newspaper reporters from New York City, and they're going to write up something new and startling about the haunted house, but they don't wish nobody in Fairfax Falls to know of them being here. The fellow with the bum smeller then shows me a $20 note, tears it across, and gives me half of it, telling me I'll get the other half if I drive to the haunted house as fast as my bus can go, and some route which won't take him through town. I left him outside looking at the house. When I get back to my stand, I go to brush out the cab, and I find one of them jazzbos has forgot to take his portfolio with him. So once again, I drive to the haunted house, but there's no sign of nobody around. And though I thump and thump on the door, I can't get no answer. Going around to the rear of this old ruin, I get a attack of dumbfoundment. Cuddled up against a window is no less than Barbara Baxter, plainly getting an earful of what's going on inside the house. "Well, for weeping in public," I gasps. "What are you doing here?" You should have seen her jump. Spiritualism is a hobby of mine, Bill," she says, recovering her wits and coming over to me. "I've been studying the haunted house, listening for the ghosts, and that sort of thing. You know." She winds up with a little laugh which sounded to me like it was forced. I must say she seemed anything but at ease. "Well, there ain't no ghosts in there now," I says. "There's a couple of guys." "Yes, who are they?" she butts in excitedly. "I promised I wouldn't tell," I says, after a minute. I was thinking of something else. "Say, listen, when are you going to begin teaching schooler here?" I ask her. That innocent question didn't seem to add nothing to her peace of mind. She gave me a long, odd look. "Very soon now?" she says. "I'll wait in your taxi and you can drive me back to town. I walked here, you know. And Bill, don't say a word to those men in there or to anyone about my being here." While Barbara sat on the cab around in the front, I pounded on the back door of the house till the fellow with the caved-in beak answered, asking who I was through the door before he opened it. I gave him the portfolio, and he's highly delighted, calling to his pal to see what they nearly lost. This little act of honesty on my part wins me $10 more and a order to call for the night at 8 the following night. It wasn't till I'd left Barbara at the hotel that the thought struck me. How did them two guys get in that house when it's always locked? Driving to the haunted house a little before 8 p.m. the following day, as per my engagement, who should call me from the sidewalk but Barbara Baxter? No sooner does she find out where I'm bound for than she insists on going with me. Well, I was in a fine predicament. She wanted to go. She was sure she'd seen the ghosts all night, and if you ever witnessed this girl, you'd get an idea of how hard it was to refuse her anything. So I took her with me on the front seat just to see what would happen. I seen what would happen. I'll howl to the wide, wide world. I parked a little distance from the haunted house at Barbara's request and left her there while I walked up, knocked, and was let inside. The first thing I noticed is that the hall is full of wooden boxes, piled high on top of each other. One of the reporters says to go back to my taxi around to the rear as they wish to load boxes in it. I ask him where they are going, and he says Rochester. "Nothing stirring," I says firmly. "I wouldn't wheel that old bus of mine to Rochester at night on a bet. Besides, it would fall apart with all them boxes in it. What's in 'em?" "Never you mind what's in 'em," says the guy with the broken nose shortly. "But there's $75 in this for you if you tend to your knittin'." But I had a sudden queer feeling that something was wrong. I thought of Barbara sitting outside alone in my taxi, and I commenced to the back out of the hall when the doors flung open and Jack Fairfax stumbles headlong into the house. He ain't got no hat on, and his face was white as a sheet. Personally, I'm commencing to get a bit dizzy. "What the?" he begins, one of the reporters. "The state troopers are on their way here. We're sunk," bawls Fairfax, and then catches sight of me. "What did you let that fellow in here for?" he howls. "He's the one who tipped them off." Fairfax stood in the background, panting and swearing at me, but the two reporters rushed me together. We were wrestling all over the place when the doors crashed in and the house is swarming with state troopers. I had never seen so many guns before in all my life, and the next thing we're all pinched, including your friend, Bill Grimm. One of the troopers caved in the lid of a box in the hall, and it turns out to be full of bottles. The bottles is full of booze. Good night. Things had indeed come to a pretty pass, and I seen the hoosegow staring me right in the face. When Barbara Baxter saunters into the now open door, Fairfax, held by a couple of husky troopers the same as I was, give a gasp and looked thoughtful when he seen her, but I was too dazed to gasp. The whole thing smacked of a nightmare to me. The troopers seem to know Barbara and give her respectful attention, while she gives me a pleasant and unanswered smile. Then she tells them to take their hands off me, as I'm innocent as a very young baby. Not only that, she goes on, but I've helped her get the evidence that Jack Fairfax and the other two scafflaws is the masterminds of a state-wide gang of common ordinary bootleggers. They was no more than newspaper reporters than a Siamese duke. While the troopers is loading their cursing prey and the boxes of hooch into the cars outside, Barbara leads the way into the deserted room of the house and tells me things. There were spirits in the haunted house, all right, but they were spiritus fermenti. It seems state prohibition enforcement headquarters had been tipped that whiskey was being brought to Fairfax Falls from Canada, taken to the alleged haunted house and cut before being sold throughout the state. Barbara Baxter, a special revenue agent, was sent to our town as a school teacher to get Fairfax and his pals with the goods. Hasn't it all been thrilling, Bill? She asked me with her hand on my arm, but I'm half sore, half disappointed. You've made me look like a squealer, I says. I ain't infatuated with Jack Fairfax by no means, but that ain't the way I'd have boxed him. I fight in the open myself. But you've done a splendid thing, says Barbara, though she did blush. They were vicious lawbreakers, Bill, and why did you give me a runaround about being a school teacher? I shut her off. I told you the truth about myself. Bill, I had to feel my way carefully, she says. I had to know I could trust you. Well, do you trust me now? I ask her. Indeed I do, she whispers. Again her hand touches my arm, and Alice's blue eyes look deep into mine. Standing as close to her as that in the pitch-dark room, I got more kick than there was in a Fairfax's booze. I had to put on the brakes hard. Being a copper is no job for a girl, I bust out. I had to say something. Oh, it isn't, says Barbara. Well, I made good, didn't I? Bill, bootleg whiskey ruined my home. It killed my father and cost my brother a high executive position. I wish I could put every one of those murderers in jail for life. Why are you so quiet? I'm thinking that the only reason you were so nice to me at all was to get the dope on them guys, I told her. Then you're thinking wrong, she says softly. I like you, Bill. That's where we should have into a clinch, but she was alone in that dark room with me, and she trusted me. I didn't know how she'd take it, and I refused to gamble. I figured it would keep, so I just said thanks and shook her hand. Bill, says Barbara, are you going to going to be a taxi chauffeur all your life. What's the difference? I says. It's an honest trade and there's good money in it. Nonsense, she butts in. Why didn't you get out of Fairfax Falls? Get out of that absurd automobile and start doing something big. Get into something worthwhile and lay the foundation for your future before it's too late. Why, there must be a dozen things you can do that offer more possibilities than driving a taxi cab in a small town. I said nothing at all. I was busy thinking. Then I realized I still had hold of her hand, and I let it go. She went out of my taxi, and I drove her back to town. The trip being made mostly in silence, though she sit beside me on the front seat. When we got to the commercial house, she says that she's going to New York City to stay with her aunt for a while, and when I merely give her a gloomy goodbye, she seemed peeved for some reason. Then she gave me her aunt's address and phone number, again telling me to leave Fairfax Falls, which was cramping my style for bigger fields and bigger opportunities. I took it for granted she was walking right out of my life when she walked up the stairs of that hotel. I'll take nothing for granted again. Well, I followed Barbara Baxter's advice. I did get out of Fairfax Falls for a bigger playground. I went to New York City, and I drive a taxi there. Now you tell one. Now you tell one. Now you tell one.